Perfect timing. Okay, hello everyone.
Hello.
Oh, it's talking. Yes, I can see. Can you hear us? Mohsen, yes. Thumbs up. Amr, we have pretty familiar faces. Ahmed, yes, nice. So welcome to Tafra Meetup number 51. As you noticed, and as you can see, we are tackling increasing diversity in product planning approaches. So before we start and tell you more about who we are for home of you who attended, who never attended actually Tafra meetups or didn't hear about us, thumbs up. You can do it from the reaction if you knew about Techie Matter before. And I'm actually watching you. Noor, Sabri, Ahmed, Mohsen, yes, Asmahan, Amira, Ayman. So it's your first time, Sabri, nice. Ahmed Magdi, Ahmed Khalid, nice. Nice. We have a familiar face. Okay, great. So before we start and before we talk about the product planning approaches, I would love to tell you more about who we are and what we do. So let me start first by introducing myself. My name is Mohammed Abdelghait. I'm the founder of Techie Matter and Tafra. Tafra, it's a platform for empowering techies through content, and we do that through different initiatives and different products. And Techie Matter is a leading tech hiring arm for hundreds of companies in 10 countries worldwide. And actually, I'm going to talk about Techie Matter later. And my background is engineering, and I have more than 7 years of experience in building businesses. Tafra is simply, as I mentioned, is a platform where we can meet like-minded techies in different, next slide, please, Hans, where we can meet like-minded techies in different tech domains, and we can engage with them and interact with them and learn from each other, maybe network, and we can find, opportunities when it comes to job opportunities and mentorship and so on. And here is a sample of our previous meetups. We used to do it in offline format, but Corona came and hit us, and we changed the format into online recently, but we will come back to conduct offline meetups because I believe with offline, gatherings, there will be a more strong bond and more activities come out of this. And hopefully Hans Brennan will be here with us in Egypt, so he can join us in one of our meetups. So actually, this is a sample of our meetups. As I mentioned, we tackle different domains. We talked about product management, DevOps, back-end, front-end development, and business analysis, and data, and different topics. And that's not only, but also, next slide, please, that we also, we care about the online content. Some of the meetups, we recorded them and we uploaded them, and we managed to produce a very interesting series for beginners in tech ecosystem in general. It's called Tafra Versus series, where you can learn more about different terms and different domains, and if there is common ground between these domains or not. And also we actually uploaded the previous meetup. If you didn't attend it, we're discussing and tackling the career perspective for software product managers. You can find it on our YouTube channel. Just search with tafra.io on YouTube, and you will find us with all the videos. This is a very glimpse on who we are and what we do. The next slide, please, Hans. So what's next? We are partnering up with two of the most reputable entities in product management and software world. To them, because it's a Latin word. Maybe Hans Brand will correct me if I said it wrong.
Sounds good.
And ISPMA, it stands for International Software Product Management Association. It's a prestigious entity that gathers academia and experts in software product management field, and they share their actually experiences in different formats. They have their regular conference. It happens on annual basis, and maybe Hans will talk about this later. And as I mentioned, this is our second meetup. We tackled the first meetup the career perspective for software product managers. And now we are going to talk about the product planning approaches, the different, approaches for product planning. And as I mentioned, next slide, please, Hans. And as I mentioned, we are partnering up with these entities to offer regular meetups, as you can notice. And also very soon, we're going to introduce courses and certifications for software product managers, whether you are beginner or senior. And that's why maybe you noticed that we were asking you in the registration form about your interest, and if you'd love to take a course in software product management, and that course that will help you to get a certification from ISPMA, following, their, I can say, frameworks and guidelines based on their experience in different domains, products, and different experiments. And this is for Tafra. And as I mentioned, Techie Matter is the leading tech hiring arm. And actually now we are hiring a mid-level associate product manager. So if you would love to know more about the opportunity, if you'd love to apply, if you'd love to learn more about Techie Matter and what we do and how we do it, please feel free to send your resume to that email. I'm going to write it down actually in the chat box, and we'll be happy to get back to you and have a quick online call, so we can see if we are a good fit for both, for each other or not. And I think that's it. Yeah, before I forgot, feel free to unmute yourself, unmute your mic, and say happy birthday to Hans Bernard. His birthday was the last week, and I'm so happy he made it and joined with us. So happy birthday, Hans. We wish you a very, very...
Thank you very much. That's nice.
Happy birthday.
Thank you, Amr.
This is Ahmed Khaled.
Happy birthday, Hans.
Thank you.
Hans.
Happy birthday, Hans. Happy birthday.
So yeah, that's it. I think the floor will be yours here now. I'm giving you the mic, so feel free to educate us about the planning approaches for software products.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Mohammed. Good evening to everybody. I'm glad that we can do this second meetup on the subject of software product management today. In the first meetup, we looked at the SPM framework and went through all the elements of the framework. If you did not participate, you can still watch it on YouTube. This time, we are going to focus on the subject of product planning. Before I go into this and talk about the different product planning approaches and give you an example of the data analysis-driven approach, let me say a few words about myself for those of you who did not participate in the first meetup. My name is Hans Bernd. I run my own training and consulting company called Innotivum, and I'm also the chairman of ISPMA. My background, I studied computer science, and then I worked for IBM for quite a number of years. First as a software developer, and later on as a project and line manager of development, before I got my first product management responsibility. And at that time, there was nothing. There were no books, no trainings. It was very much learning by doing. And when I asked other people who had that job what they were doing, I got very different answers. So that was part of my motivation why later on, when I started my own company, I focused on the subject of software product management. And I've done lots of trainings and consulting work for companies all over the world. be it Infosys in India or Samsung in Korea, lots of European companies of all sizes. I've also published a couple of books on the subject. The latest one is the one here on the left side. It came out last month, brand new, and it is compliant to the body of knowledge of ISBMA. So this can be used also as a study guide for our training courses. Well, this is what we looked at in the last meetup. We went through all the elements of the framework. In case you did not participate, the idea behind this framework is to show in a structured way how a product manager looks on a software product organization. And the core responsibilities of software product managers are the columns of product strategy and product planning, plus the orchestration part for the other functional areas of the company. Today, we are going to focus on the product planning column. And that's an area that you find lots of publications on, in particular on a subject like requirements engineering, lots of publications because the academic community did a lot of work on the subject over the last 30 years. But what we are seeing more and more is that new approaches to product planning have come up, which become more and more relevant for software product managers. So the traditional requirements-driven approach continues to be relevant, but in other scenarios, product managers make use of what we call a data analysis-driven approach. And this basically means that we look at usage data of the product, and based on that usage data, we analyze it and make decisions based on the results of our analysis. I will talk a bit more about this in a minute. The third approach is what we call data input driven. So this approach is applicable to artificial intelligence components, machine learning approaches, where you need to feed data into the machine so that the machine can learn based on that domain data. By the way, whenever you have a question or want to add something, feel free to speak up, interrupt me, and we can discuss whatever you have on your mind. So let's start by looking at the traditional requirements-driven approach. I assume that you are all familiar with this approach. And like I said, it continues to be relevant, but more and more with a focus on certain areas. So one typical area for this approach is legal requirements or regulatory requirements in certain industries. Commodity functionality and technology aspects also generate requirements. Back-end development is still to a large degree based on such a requirements-driven approach. And this can be applied in all scenarios of software products. We will come back to these terms here, vendor controlled and customer controlled, in a couple of minutes. The frequently used techniques in this area are market elicitation. So first of all, we need to find out what are the market requirements. These need to be analyzed, and then we need to make decisions. Which of the identified requirements do we want to implement when? So that's the typical approach when we work requirements driven, and this applies to requirements engineering and then also to release planning. The second approach is what we call data analysis driven. And this is about experiments. So in a lot of situations, we do not have clear requirements. We know we want to achieve something, but we do not exactly know how to achieve it. And that's where experiments can help. And this is very typical when we work on the front end. So, for example, in the area of UX design, experiments play a major role. We want to optimize on something, and that's part of this approach. We need to make a decision. What is it that we want to optimize on? So I will give you an example about this in a few minutes, how you can design these experiments. This is also applicable when we talk about innovation, some innovative technologies or elements in your product where we do not yet have experience. We do not know exactly how to use that new technology in order to generate as much customer value as possible. And that is also a situation where experiments can help. The techniques that you find in this area, from the startup world, we have the term of minimum viable product, which is also a way of experimentation. So in a startup situation, you want to get feedback from the market, from your potential customers as early as possible if you are on the right track. And that's what the minimum viable product is about. We want to learn how we can develop the product further and make sure that it provides sufficient value to our target customers. When it comes to the design and implementation of experiments, one approach that has become very popular is called A/B testing. And we will look into this in more detail in a couple of minutes. But there are also other approaches how to design these kind of experiments. Of course, when we talk about data analysis, then statistics play a role. So if you want to work with this approach, you better know something about statistics. Otherwise, you run the risk that your data analysis may end up being not statistically sound. And I will also talk about that. You can find articles on the internet that say that more than 50% of all A/B tests are not statistically sound for all kinds of reasons. And I will talk about some of these reasons a bit later. The third approach is what we call data input driven. So this is related to machine learning engines that are used to tackle certain challenges that are not so easy to tackle with a traditional requirements-driven approach. We are all familiar with chatbots. That's probably the application area of this approach that is most widely used. But we see other machine learning applications as well. So I think this is a growing market, a growing area. And what is needed here is domain-specific data that can be used as input to this engine, so that based on that data, the engine can go through a learning process and improve its behavior, its reactions to certain inputs. In these environments, you more and more find the role of the data scientist in addition to the role of the product manager. Data scientists are people who are specialized on things like data structure design, data cleansing, and also on all the statistical challenges in this area. We think that more and more product managers need to master all three approaches. Sorry. So for a lot of software products, what we see is that different components of the software product require different approaches. Maybe your product has a backend and you apply the requirements-driven approach to the backend. It may have a front end and you apply a data analysis-driven approach to the front end. And it may have some components based on machine learning, and you need to apply the data input-driven approach to those components. So we think that more and more product managers need to be able to apply all three approaches to different parts of software products. And that's why we have extended our body of knowledge into these new approaches, which is not so easy because, in particular, when we talk about the data input-driven approach, there is not yet a real standardization. So still not a firm, what I would call best practice. So that makes it a bit difficult to teach this, but we have found a way how to deal with the situation. What is applicable also depends on the scenario that you are in with your product or with a particular component of your product. And we use two criteria to differentiate scenarios. One criterion is who is in charge of the runtime environment. Is it the customer? That is typical for licensed software products, where the vendor sells the software product to the customer, and the customer runs the software in his own environment. That's what we call customer controlled. With software as a service, the runtime environment is under the control of the vendor. And that is also true, for example, for internet platforms. When you as the vendor are in control of the runtime environment, you have more options what to do. And I'll come back to that. The other criterion that we use is where is the product in its life cycle? So is this new product development, something revolutionary, or is this existing product evolution? In new product development, you do not yet have customers. Whereas in the existing product situation, you already have customers that you can involve in getting data about usage. So when you use these two criteria, you end up with 4 scenarios, and we have used these boat names for the 4 scenarios. Powerboat and speedboat, these are the scenarios where the vendor is in control of the runtime environment. And in these scenarios, you typically find a higher release frequency with smaller releases. A company like Amazon claims that they do more than 1,000 releases per day. That is not the same release term that we are used to from licensed products, the icebreaker and cruise ship scenarios, where our customers do not want too many releases. So with products in these scenarios, the release frequency is usually much lower, but the content of the releases is bigger. That requires more elaborate planning. Whereas in the Amazon situation, when they say 1,000 releases per day, most of what they mean by releases are very small changes of code. That is very powerful when you want to optimize on time to market. It is not quite so powerful when you want to optimize on quality of your software. So that's one of these decisions that companies have to make. What is it that you want to optimize on? But these days, more and more companies want to optimize on time to market and try to get into these speedboat scenarios where you can apply techniques like the DevOps approach, which helps you to make any change that development has finished and bring it into production as fast as possible. So that's here in this meetup. We don't have the time to go into a DevOps in detail. That's part of the SPM training. But this is an approach that has quite a lot of popularity, but it's not as easy to implement that as some people think. Do you have any questions regarding the 3 different approaches to product planning?
Feel free, guys, to unmute yourself and ask questions.
I have a question, Hans, if you
Sure.
don't mind. Regarding the data analysis approaches and data-driven approaches, does this require the product manager to be kind of a data savvy? I know for a product manager, he must know a bit about the technology stack used in the software produced. However, for the data analysis, I think, according to what I understood, that the product manager needs to understand a lot more about data analysis than the average user or the average,
I agree. I agree. If you want to apply the data analysis driven approach, you need to learn about statistics, and you need to learn about the environment in which you can apply it. So it depends a bit also on the rules within your organization. See, some time ago, I was invited to a product owner meeting here in Germany, and a young lady presented their approach to A/B testing. And she said she and her colleagues were not allowed to make any change in the system without doing an A/B test before. And some people in the audience said, what does your company need you for when you cannot make any decisions on your own? And she said, it's not my job to make decisions. It's my job to design and implement experiments. So it's a different approach. And of course, it has its requirements in terms of what you need to be an expert in order to apply it. And we will look into the subject of A/B tests in a bit more detail. Does that answer your question?
Yes, Hans, thank you.
You're welcome.
But maybe I have, a question about, like, maybe you can elaborate it more. Based on what Omar mentioned and what I noticed recently in, the company's structure when it comes to product team, they refer to sometimes, okay, this is a technical product manager with maybe technical background, and someone with business, background, we can call business product manager, and like not exactly these titles, but we know this product manager maybe care more about data and technicality and tracking stuff and so on. So do you believe in that, or like, do you believe the product manager should have, minimum of like a bit of everything? You should have minimum of data analytics and statistics and maybe like business understanding and awareness of your domain? Or like, do you believe on the other side of having different product managers, and each product manager maybe he's excelling with certain background, so like they can complete each other?
Well, you see, I think one of the most important elements of the job of a product manager is asking stupid questions. And if you have no idea what the other people are doing, then some of your questions may be a bit too stupid. So I think it does require some understanding how these things work and what it means to apply them. It does not necessarily mean that the business product manager, as you call the role, needs to implement the tests her or himself. That is not the point. But you need to understand how this whole approach works, and where are the critical aspects where things can go wrong.
Yeah, you got your point. So we have, I think, a question in the chat. It's not a question. Muhammad, he's saying there is no sound. Guys, can you hear us, right? Can you hear me? Can you hear Hans Bern?
Yes, perfectly. We can hear you perfectly.
Okay, I think Muhammad, maybe you need to, I'm not sure, maybe you can check your sound, something. But yeah, we can continue, Hans. Thank you.
Okay. So let me go into the area of data analysis-driven product planning. This is about experiments. And the most popular approach to design and conduct these experiments is what is called A/B test. In general, when we talk about the design of experiments, we need to answer a number of questions. The first question is, what is the hypothesis that we want to verify or falsify? So what is the question that the experiment is about? What do we want to find out? Once we have found an answer, then the next question is there a measurable key indicator that can help us to answer the question? So, for example, when we talk about optimization, what is the measure that we want to optimize on? And again, that requires a decision that we have to make. Third question is about statistics. Once we have defined our hypothesis and the key indicator, what are the statistical requirements? So, for example, what is the minimum sample size that we need to reach so that the experiment is statistically sound? Sounds obvious, but that is actually more difficult than you would initially think in a lot of situations, and I will show you an example. When you have answered all these questions, then question number 4 is, are we really prepared for these measurements? So is our software prepared? Is our infrastructure prepared to implement the experiment? And that is relevant for the icebreaker and the cruise ship scenarios. Can we get access to the measured data? When the software runs in the customer's environment, customers often do not like us to get access to data that is generated in their environment. That can be a challenge. When we are in a speedboat scenario where the software runs in our own environment, then it's usually much easier to get access to the data in our environment.
I have a question here, Hans, regarding point number 3.
Yes.
You mentioned in a previous slide that almost half of the A/B tests are inaccurate. I think that's because it's not, from a statistical point of view, is not the data are not enough. Is that correct?
That is very often the reason, yes. That the sample size, the minimum sample size that is required is quite high, and that's why it takes a long time to reach that minimum sample size, and very often product managers don't want to wait so long, so they stop the experiment before they reach the minimum sample size. That is a major reason why a lot of these tests are not statistically sound.
So we need to use A/B tests only for optimization, not for discovery or some sort of experiments with at the early stages of the product, right?
That depends. I mean, you see, when you want to use A/B test, it means that you already have to have a significant number of users. So in the very early stages where you don't have these users yet, the approach is not applicable. But once you have reached a certain number of users of your system, then this can work. And of course, that depends on the type of product. How long does it take to get to a sufficient number of users?
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Yes, Hans, I have a question regarding point number 4. You see, I know it's harder to, excuse me, I know it's harder to get customer-specific data, especially after GDPR applying. So how to deal with this? You sometimes need customers' data in order to validate your assumptions and to know how a platform is progressing. However, with rules just like GDPR, your hands are kind of tied in this situation. How do you deal with this?
Well, there are different approaches. One approach is that the customer's data, when it includes personal data of their own customers, is anonymized, so that you cannot find out who the people are behind the data that you get. In a lot of application areas, that can work. So that's how you can circumvent the GDPR requirements. But still, a lot of customers do not like to give access to their systems for these kind of measurements to vendors in general. They just want to make sure that their runtime environments are protected. So that can be a challenge. And that's the main reason why you find these approaches much more in speedboat scenarios than you find them in cruise ship scenarios. One option that you have in a cruise ship scenario where the software runs in the customer's environment is if you can convince the customer that the experiment is not only to your advantage, but also to the customer's advantage, that the customer, based on the results of the experiment, can also improve the way their customers use the system or the way that they reach their business objectives. So if you can turn this into a kind of win-win situation, then customers may be more willing to cooperate with you on this. Does this answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you, Hans.
You're welcome. So once you have done your design of the experiment, then the implementation part means you need to prepare your software, your infrastructure, and your data access. You execute the experiment, you analyze the resulting data, and hopefully you come to conclusions. You can answer the initial question. Here's an example, very typical, for example, for e-commerce internet platforms, where you try to optimize the front end. And the key indicator that is frequently used in these scenarios is conversion rate. So the percentage of users who actually click on the button, simply said. So let's assume we want to compare two different implementations of a web page, for example. And our hypothesis is that implementation B improves the conversion rate by 20% compared to implementation A. The numbers that you see here and the graphics do not really fit to the example, so sorry for that. Now, in this case, conversion rate is the key indicator that the company wants to optimize on. But there can be situations where it's more difficult to find the right key indicator for the hypothesis. So, for example, if you want to optimize on the productivity of users of the system, you may say, okay, we use average time to finish a particular task as the key indicator. But when you try to optimize on this key indicator, you do not consider quality. And that can have really bad effects. So maybe the users are much faster, but the failure rate is also much higher. So you need to be very careful what you optimize on. So defining the key indicator is not as trivial as you might initially think. Now, going back to the subject of sample size. In our example, let's assume the baseline conversion rate is 2%, and we want to improve that by 20%. So we want to get to a conversion rate of 2.4%. So that means that our minimum detectable effect must be these 20% that we want to improve. And we want to reach a statistical significance of 95%. So that means with our experiment, we want to ensure that at least in 95% of the cases, the results of the experiment really are reliable. There are tools that can help you to calculate the minimum sample size based on these inputs. So, for example, Optimizely is one of these tools. This is pure statistics. So there are formulas how you can calculate this. In this example, these numbers result in a minimum sample size of 20,000. Is that a lot or a small number? That depends on the situation. So when we do our optimization on a web page that is very frequently used by the users of the system, we may reach 20,000 within a couple of hours. However, when we look at a page that is rarely used by the users, reaching 20,000 may mean that it takes a couple of months till we get there. And those are the typical situations where product managers say, I can't wait that long, let's stop the experiment after 1 month. And maybe you are at 5,000 after 1 month. And then if you use the results, that is not statistically sound. So you should not be too confident in those situations that you really reach what you were going after. So that's one of the challenges with these kind of approaches. Do you have any experiences with A/B testing?
Yes, I do. But however, it used, of course, less sample size. And the thing is, we depended, the key indicator here was customer feedback to test the new UX on some of the functions they daily use.
Okay.
So it wasn't really number based, if you get what I mean.
Okay. But that does not necessarily make it easier, right? when you do not focus on numbers but on qualitative feedback, you don't know when to stop either, right?
Exactly.
This isn't necessarily an experience that I've had with A/B testing, but I will say there's kind of like a misconception that a minimum sample size, I mean, you know, the larger the sample size, the more accurate, I guess, your data. But one thing that, you know, could be measured, and I use this more for user sentiment analysis, is a confidence interval. It's, you know, in stat, it's something that we'd learned, but it also helps us kind of determine the minimum sample size. But it's definitely a process of explaining it to our users that, you know, large doesn't necessarily mean better. Sometimes it could mean actually, you know, it could be more detrimental. So yeah.
Well, you see, when you stop the experiment before you reach the minimum sample size that you have calculated based on these parameters, it means that you do not reach the statistical significance that you wanted to reach. Maybe that's okay, but why did you start with this value here when in the end you say that's not so important, right? So it's really key here that you think about the parameters, the input parameters, very thoroughly, and make sure that they actually meet what you want to achieve. It's very easy to go with numbers that are just too high. Of course, then you are on the safe side, but the experiment in the end will not really work, right? So this requires quite a bit of thinking and making sure that you find the right balance between what you select as parameters and what makes sense from an implementation perspective. When we talk about infrastructure for this kind of test, you need to be able to separate the user base. So if you want to present alternative A to one half of your users and alternative B to the other half of your users, you need an infrastructure that allows you to do that. There are also tools in this area that you can use, but it is an initial investment to implement these things. And the tools can also help you to automatically stop the experiment when your minimum sample size has been reached, and it helps you with calculating the numbers. But all that needs to be in place for the implementation. There are also more, let's say, basic requirements when it comes to the architecture of your system. If you want to be able to show two different alternatives within the same runtime environment, you need some sort of modular service-oriented architecture of your software in order to be able to do that. When your software is monolithic, it will not work. So there are a couple of prereqs in this area if you want to apply A/B testing. To make sure that all these prereqs are in place, that can be a significant amount of work. So do not underestimate the initial work that is needed. Once you have implemented all the prereqs and you have implemented the infrastructure, then doing repeated A/B tests is not so difficult. But the initial setup, that can be quite expensive. We talked about data access. So when you think of the powerboat and speedboat scenarios where the vendor is in charge of the runtime environment, data access is usually not really a problem. Of course, you still need to think about GDPR, but that is usually doable in these scenarios. And in those situations, the question is actually, how much do you want to record? Do you want to store? The extreme case is that you store everything. So, for example, that's what Amazon does. With Amazon, you, even as a user, you can go back over quite a number of years and see all your transactions with Amazon. And I'm sure in the background, they even have more information on you. So not only the purchases, but also how you use the Amazon website, what did you look at that you in the end may not have bought. So huge data store, and they store everything to be prepared to analyze that data at some later point when they see a need to analyze it.
I think Uber does the same, right?
I think so, yes. Of course, that is a cost factor. So it's a business decision. Do you really want to carry the cost of storing everything? But a number of these big players actually do that. Well, and we already talked about the icebreaker and cruise ship scenarios where data access usually requires the cooperation with the individual customers. So you need to come to win-win situations with the customers. In these areas, there can also be opportunities for professional service offerings. So maybe you can offer a service to customers to help them with conducting these kind of experiments in their environment in order to improve their front ends. Well, the other question, we already talked about that briefly, is how long do we let the experiment run? So if the code is not heavily used, very often the experiment is stopped before the sample size is reached, and so the results are not statistically sound. In the other situation, where there is heavy usage and the sample size is reached very quickly, this can also be dangerous because there may be some longer business cycles that you do not consider when you stop after a few hours. So in that sense, the results may also not be really sound because they have not covered these longer business cycles. Any questions?
Yes, it's regarding the last part about the A/B testing. So what I understood, Hans, is that I should take into consideration while planning for a new application, for example, that I should have some metrics or data that might be useful to study in the future. Is this correct?
Well, I mean, maybe today you do not know yet what you are going to be interested in 3 years from now. And that's the reason why these companies store all the data over long periods of time. They want to be prepared. So that's an investment in order to be able later on to have the data that you can use for all kinds of analysis. But that is not necessarily foreseeable what they are going to use it for. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay. So that was the part on product planning approaches and A/B test as an example of the data analysis driven approach. Now let me give you a little bit of information about ISPMA. ISPMA is a non-profit organization that was founded more than 10 years ago. And from the very beginning, our vision was that we want to foster SPM excellence across industries by establishing software product management as a discipline of its own, both on the academic side and on the industry side. In industry, that has more or less been achieved in the software industry. But what we are seeing now is that almost all the other industries also need to go to a software product management approach because software plays a more and more important role as part of their physical products. On the academic side, progress is kind of slow. So there are not that many academic education offerings dedicated to the subject of software product management, but there are some by now. So there's a Finnish university that offers a master degree in software product management. There's a US university, Carnegie Mellon, that offers a master degree in product management. There are Indian business schools that offer product management as courses to their MBA students. So we are making progress on the academic side as well, but kind of slow. The way we have been doing this is we have developed a body of knowledge on software product management. That body of knowledge is described in the syllabi, and the body of knowledge is the basis both for training courses and also for certification. Here you see our fellows. the fellows of ISPMA are the experts who really develop the content. And we are very proud of this really diverse group of people, diverse in terms of geography, diverse in terms of gender, and diverse also in terms of professional backgrounds, quite a number of university professors, quite a number of industry people. So it's really a great mix of people, and that's unique in the product management education area. This is the current curriculum of ISPMA. So the basis is what we call the foundation. That covers the whole SPM framework. On top of that, we have these so-called excellence modules that go a bit deeper into the different areas of product management. What we have just introduced is a new module called SPM for Startups. So that is really targeted at startup situations, either startups in the sense of new companies, but also new product development in established companies that is done in a startup mode. A lot of established companies try to shield these teams from all the corporate overhead, and then they can work in what we call startup mode. So for those situations, this is also relevant.
More of a culture, is just no naming.
Sorry?
It's more of a culture for these companies. Like
yes.
We are a startup culture.
Yes, I agree. Each of these 6 modules comes with its own certification based on multiple choice tests conducted by independent certification agencies. We also organize conferences. The next ones are planned for Europe and Frankfurt in May 23 as a hybrid conference. So it will be in-person event in Frankfurt and also available online. There will also be a conference in Bangalore in India in March, and we are working on the first SPM summit in the US, which is planned for early 23 in New York City. So Mohammed and Amra joined us for our last SPM summit in Frankfurt, and can tell you all about it.
It was a great experience, actually. We learned a lot. And we connected with really experts in the field, with, you know, service companies, product companies, different backgrounds, as you mentioned. So it was very rich.
Yeah. Today, ISPMA has more than 2,800 members worldwide, growing nicely. Individual membership is free. Company membership comes with a small fee. When you do a certification exam, you can become a member automatically. Any questions regarding ISPMA? Okay. We have made plans for another Tafra meetup. This time we plan a panel discussion on the subject of platforms. That has been a term that has got quite a lot of attention over the last 10 years. So in this meetup, we will talk about what does platform really mean, and yes, will they conquer the world?
Actually, Yeah, I'm very looking forward to knowing more about your opinions, the panelists, about it.
Mhm. Yeah. So if you think you have some experience on the responsibility for a platform, let us know. And like Mohammed said, we are planning to do SPM training courses in your area, both for beginners and for seniors. I certainly hope that we can do it in person, because I would love to travel to your area. But if that does not work, then we could also do it online. All right, that was my part. If you have any questions or want to know more, feel free to connect. And with that, I thank you. And Mohammed, I think we still have room for a couple of questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Hans Bernd, for the session. It is really insightful. New terms, the graph, and people are clapping for the content. Things they enjoyed it. So, guys, we have time for questions. If you have any question, please feel free to ask. Like, just unmute your mic and ask the question. If you don't, it's fine. We, as Hans Bernd mentioned in the last slides, we are going to conduct another meetup soon, and actually the topic is very interesting, and we would love to know your thoughts about it. We'd love to see you in the next meetup to understand, do you think platforms will conquer the world with like their pros and cons, or like they are not with this? So next slide, please, Hans. So we are going to send you a very simple email. We're going to ask you 2 simple questions. And I'm sure your valuable time, your time is so valuable, and you can just give us 1 minute of your valuable time to share with us your thoughts. One of the questions is, what did you like about the meetup? And the other question is, what do you think we can improve, and what do you think we can enhance, so you can like have a better experience with online meetup? And as I mentioned, next slide, please, Hans. And as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, that Techie Matter, which is a tech hiring arm for hundreds of companies in 10 countries worldwide, we are hiring a mid-level / associate product manager, software product manager. So please, if you know any of your network, like matching the title, who has done it before, like maybe for 1 year or less, would love to interview him or her. And please send your resume to this email. And with that, next slide, please, Hans. We thank you for your time. We thank you for staying with us till now, and see you at the next Tafra meetup.
Sorry, real quick, with the previous resume that you were requesting, or that you were talking about, what about people with product analyst experience?
We understand that product managers can come from different backgrounds, and they are not all joined product management field from the graduation period. So if you think you have the minimum level of experience in doing the basic things like user research, and maybe creating product or something like that, please share your resume, and we'll contact you if we see your profile is relevant to our needs. And even though if we like our requirements are not matching, we'll send you a feedback, and we'll thank you for your email.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I was in a different work meeting, so I joined a little bit later. Would this PowerPoint with that provided email be available via email, or
will be
how can I access that slide?
This meetup is recorded and will be uploaded on YouTube, so you can we'll send you the link when we upload it. So you can, you know, check the slides and the whole meetup record on YouTube later.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for spending your evening with us.
Actually, I'm curious to ask one last question. Ropali, right? Ropali or something. I'm saying it right?
Yes, you are.
Yeah.
I'll get my video on too. Hi.
Hi.
Sorry about the stain on my shirt.
So I'm curious to know from where you are joining us.
I am joining from the United States. And the whole APM role is a little bit interesting just because I work as a product analyst, but we had our product manager actually leave my current organization. So we've, you know, the product owner and myself have been kind of taking up a lot of responsibilities that, you know, our PM previously kind of undertook. So I'm, you know, thinking about transitioning, but I am from the United States to answer your question.
We're so happy to have you with us. Like we used to have different, you know, people from different countries, different backgrounds. So like we are happy that you joined us, and hopefully we can see you at the next Tafra meetup.
Yeah, no, very informational session about A/B testing. You know, definitely with a B2B organization, you're right about it being pretty challenging for businesses to start kind of accepting one, you know, providing the data for A/B tests and you know, actually feeling more comfortable with it. So really, really, really informational. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Okay, guys, thank you for your time. See you in the next meetup, and please be connected with us through LinkedIn, Facebook, and you will find the meetup record on YouTube very soon. Thank you. Have a very lovely night.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.